Have you ever wondered what it's like to remember the world as an infant? Adults are able to effortlessly recall details of past events. The world of infants operates in a fascinating yet distinct way. Today, we will explore the science of infant memory. Are their memory systems so different from ours, or do they operate on the same fundamental principles of short term and long term memory? Let's dive into the research and uncover what we know about the incredible evolution of memory during infancy. If memory components are considered to be permanent structural features, we can assume that infants and adults share the same fundamental memory systems: short term or working memory and long term memory. If this assumption holds true, it suggests that the basic features like duration and capacity would reveal similarities between infants and adult memories. If that is the case, what do we know about memory in infancy? Memory in infancy evolves with age, although it might appear different due to the infant's pre-verbal state and shorter retention span. The primary distinction between infant and adult memory lie in the efficiency, duration, and complexity of these systems as they mature with neural development. The process of encoding, storage, and retrieval are present from infancy, but grow more sophisticated and capable over time. Let's look at key features of infant memory. Infants display remarkable memory capabilities from birth, challenging earlier beliefs that memory processes emerge only later in childhood. The early competence lays the groundwork for more sophisticated cognitive abilities. We are going to be looking at auditory memories. Newborns have the ability to recognize their mother's voices shortly after birth, a finding supported by studies demonstrating that auditory stimuli are encoded prenatally. For example, newborns show a preference for their mother's voice over unfamiliar voices. Fetuses exposed to specific music or speech patterns in the womb display recognition of these sounds after birth, indicating prenatal encoding of auditory memories. This competence serves an adaptive function, helping newborns identify caregivers and build early attachment bonds. Now, apart from auditory memories, we can look at visual recognition. By 2 to 3 months, infants can recognize and prefer familiar faces, particularly their caregivers. This recognition is key for social development as it helps infants differentiate between caregivers and strangers. Infants also encode simple patterns and can discriminate between shapes or colors, showcasing early perceptual memories. By around 4 to 6 months, infants can recognize abstract relationships such as spatial arrangements. For example, infants can recall the position of an object under a cloth even after a short delay. Studies using habituation paradigms reveal that infants detect changes in visual patterns, indicating memory for abstract relational features. The ability to retain and retrieve information evolves dramatically during the first 18 months of life. This is due to neural development and repeated exposure to stimuli. At 2 months, infants retain learned behaviors for only 1 to 2 days. In the operant conditioning task, an infant learns to kick their legs to move a mobile, but this memory decays quickly unless it is reinforced. By 6 months, memory extends for similar tasks, and by 18 months, retention can last for a very long time. These improvements in retention are linked to both maturation and memory related brain structures like the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, and increasing environmental interaction. Early on, infants may rely on passive memory processes driven by exposure and repetition. As they approach toddlerhood, they begin to exhibit rudimentary strategies like looking longer at novel stimuli or showing surprise at unexpected outcomes, reflecting an ability to process and store information more effectively. Furthermore, infant memory systems may share core similarities with those of adults, including fundamental processes of encoding, storage, and retrieval. However, these systems operate with reduced efficiency and complexity in infancy. Infants exhibit implicit memory, non-conscious memory of skills or procedure from birth. For example, a newborn turning towards a familiar voice reflects implicit memory. Infants in deferred imitation tasks demonstrate memory for observed actions even without conscious awareness of the learning episode. demonstrating a presence of anoetic consciousness. Explicit memory involving conscious recollection begins to emerge later in the first year and becomes more pronounced as the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex mature. This is evidenced by tasks requiring recall of specific events or objects. The recognition of patterns, spatial relationships, and faces in infancy serve as a precursor to more complex memory abilities. Early recognition skills evolve into the ability to encode and retrieve autobiographical memories in later childhood. Implicit associative memories in infancy provide the groundwork for complex learning tasks and problem solving. Now, why then does the memory of an infant feel very different if there are similarities? Despite the structural continuity, infant memories differ qualitatively from adult memories due to the following factors. Infants encode memories without the aid of language, which limits their ability to organize and articulate experiences. For example, while an adult might encode an event as I visited the zoo and saw an elephant, an infant may encode sensory fragments like the sight of the elephant or the sound of its trumpet. As language acquisition progresses, verbal labels enable more structured encoding and retrieval, facilitating the transition to declarative and episodic memory systems. A more elaborate video will be done on the importance of language in memory development. Furthermore, infants rely heavily on environmental and contextual cues for retrieval. A memory encoded in a specific crib, for example, is more likely to be retrieved if the same crib is present during the recall. Studies with the mobile paradigm reveal that altering the visual or auditory context, changing the crib's bumper patterns, significantly affect recall. Adults, by contrast, exhibit flexible retrieval systems, allowing them to recall memories across varied contexts. Early memories tend to fade quickly unless reinforced through repetition. This phenomenon occurs due to immature neural pathways that limit the consolidation of long-term memory, rapid developmental changes that reorganizes the brain, disrupting access to earlier memories, the lack of coherent self-concept or linguistic framework which impedes the encoding of episodic memories. To study memory capabilities of preverbal infants, researchers have developed innovative paradigms that rely on observable behaviors such as looking times, motor actions, or imitation, monkey see, monkey do, to infer memory encoding, storage, and retrieval. We're going to talk about the paradigms. The first one we're talking about is the novelty preference paradigm. Infants tend to naturally pay more attention to novel stimuli, that's things that are new. This preference forms the basis for studying recognition memory. By measuring looking times, the researchers can infer whether infants remember previously encountered stimuli. The next paradigm we're going to be talking about is the visual paired comparison paradigm. In this paradigm, infants are familiarized with a single stimulus or a pair of identical stimuli. During the test phase, one of these familiar stimuli is paired with a novel one. If the infant spends remarkable time looking at the new stimulus, it indicates recognition for the familiar one. At 3 to 4 months, infants are able to retain memories for up to 5 to 10 seconds. By 6 months, they can remember familiar stimuli for minutes or even days. For complex visual stimuli like facial photographs, 5-month-olds can recognize faces after a delay of up to 2 weeks. Newborns display face recognition within minutes and retain recognition for up to 24 hours by 3 months. The next paradigm we're going to be discussing about is the habituation paradigm. In this paradigm, infants are repeatedly exposed to a stimulus until their interest wanes, as measured by decreased looking times. When presented with a new stimulus, increased attention signifies recognition of novelty. Habituation rates are linked to cognitive abilities, implying that infants who look at objects for a short period of time tend to show better recognition than infants who are looking at objects for longer durations of time. The habituation and the visual paired comparison paradigm highlights the development of visual recognition memory and its improvement over the first year of life. These paradigms underscore how rapidly infants process and store information. The next paradigms we're going to be talking about involve the conditioning paradigms. The conditioning paradigms assess memory by teaching infants to associate stimuli or actions with rewards or consequences. We have the classical conditioning and the operant conditioning paradigms under this. Let's take a look at the experiment by Ivan Pavlov in the early 1900s. We would see that he introduces two stimuli, the unconditioned stimulus and the neutral stimulus. The unconditioned stimulus is one that naturally elicits a response, a behavioral response. In the experiment, he uses food, and the neutral stimulus is the bell. Now, constant pairing of the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus will bring about a situation whereby the neutral stimulus is enough to elicit the response that is desired, which is when you ring the bell, the dog begins to salivate. In this case, infants learn to associate a neutral stimulus, which is a tone, with an unconditioned stimulus, which is a puff of air. Over time, this constant pairing of both the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus elicits a conditioned response, such as blinking. A puff of air to their face could lead them to blink. But then every time you blow air and you ring a tone and they might blink. And suddenly when you just ring the tone, they are blinking. That's what classical conditioning is telling us. Now, let's look at one study. In a study with 7 months old, the results showed that there was persistence in conditioned responses for weeks, demonstrating early long-term memory capabilities. The effectiveness of conditioning depends on age. Younger infants require longer intervals between the stimuli, while older infants and adults respond to shorter intervals. Now, the second example of conditioning paradigm falls in operant conditioning, which is a form of learning by association in which the consequence maintains the behavior. Infants learn behaviors through reinforcement. A reinforcement is anything that increases the likelihood of a behavior. For instance, they perform actions that produce rewarding outcomes, such as movement or sound. In the mobile conjugate reinforcement task, infants as young as 2 months learn to kick their legs to move a mobile. Memory duration increases with age, progressing from 1 to 2 days at 2 months to 2 weeks at 6 months and at 14 weeks at 18 months. In the train task, older infants, which is 6 to 24 months, are able to press a lever to move a toy train. Retention during this task parallel those in the mobile task, confirming the developmental progression of operant memory systems. Operant conditioning reveals that infants' memory retention increases predictably with age, highlighting the developmental continuity of learning and memory processes. Deferred imitation paradigm, infants demonstrate the ability to encode and later reproduce observed actions, reflecting representational memory. Infants observe an experimenter performing a sequence of target actions. This could imply shaking a maraca or hitting it on the table. After a delay, infants are given the opportunity to replicate these actions. Now, at 6 months, infants can imitate actions after a 24-hour delay. Retention span lengthens with age, which is a trend in this topic, with 18 months old recalling actions weeks later. Even at 3 months, infants can exhibit deferred imitation when reminders are used to maintain memories. Deferred imitation demonstrates that representational memory emerges earlier than previously believed. This challenges Piaget's claim that mental representation develops only after 18 months. We have two paradigms which help us to understand how forgotten memories can be restored or prolonged through reminders. Now, the first one is reinstatement. This explains how partial re-exposure to the training context or stimuli, such as viewing a familiar mobile without reinforcement, can extend or increase the duration of an information in memory. In 2 months old, periodic reminders, which is reinstatement, allows memory to persist for up to 5 months, far longer than the typical 1 to 2 days without reminders. The second one is reactivation, and it includes introducing a fragment of the original memory, which could imply a tune, a sound, or a visual cue, which primes recall and restores forgotten responses. A single reactivation session doubled retention duration in 3 months, demonstrating the persistence of latent memories. Now, let's look at the significance of reinstatement and reactivation. Reinstatement typically produces longer lasting memory effects than reactivation. Both of these processes highlight how memory traces in infants, though seemingly fragile, can be recovered with the right cues. Overall, these paradigms demonstrate that infant memories, while seemingly fragile, can be robustly maintained under the right conditions. Now, let's look at differences and similarities between infant and adult memories. Let's start with the similarities. The first one, core memory processes, encoding, storage, and retrieval. The fundamental processes of memory, which is encoding information, storing it for future use, and retrieving it when needed, are shared by both infants and adults. Infants encode experiences using sensory cues and associative learning. This is where the conditioning paradigms fall under. For example, they link a visual stimuli, like a toy, to a specific reward, like movement in the mobile paradigm. Adults perform similar processes but with greater efficiency due to the maturity of neural pathways and the ability to use complex strategies like semantic encoding, deeper meanings. Both infants benefit from context dependent memories, where retrieval is facilitated when the environmental or situational cues at recall match those present during encoding. Infants rely heavily on context because their retrieval is highly specific. An infant trained to kick and move a mobile in a crib with a specific pattern shows better memory retention when tested in the same crib environment. Adults also use context cues, but their retrieval processes are more flexible. Both infants and adults demonstrate plasticity, adapting to new learning and environmental changes. Infants quickly form associations, recognizing faces or sounds in a way that parallels adult learning, but at a simpler level due to limited experiences and linguistic constraints. We've talked about the similarities. Now let's talk about the differences between adult and infant memories. Infants exhibit shorter retention spans than adults due to the immaturity of their neural systems, particularly the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. A 2-month-old baby or infant retains memory for 1 to 2 days, while adults can retain similar information indefinitely, depending on rehearsal and consolidation mechanisms. Infants show early forms of explicit memory through deferred imitation and operant conditioning paradigms, but this ability is just rudimentary. Full declarative memory, which involves conscious recall of facts or events, emerges later as language and self awareness develops. The shift to verbal encoding after language acquisition also changes how information is organized and retrieved. Adults construct detailed autobiographical memories tied to a sense of self, integrating language, emotions, and temporal frameworks, which is time. Infants, on the other hand, lack the stable self concept necessary for autobiographical memory. Their memories are more event based and contextual rather than personal narratives. Adults utilize advanced memory strategies such as categorization, semantic encoding, and mnemonic devices to enhance retention and retrieval. Infants depend on simpler associative processes, and their memory recall is often limited to the exact conditions under which encoding occurred. Infants forget more rapidly. This is attributed to their reliance on immature neural pathways and their dependence on specific cues for retrieval. In contrast, adults benefit from more robust neural connectivity and retrieval strategies that allow for more memory reconstruction. The differences between infant and adult memories are not absolute, but exist on a developmental continuum. The foundational mechanisms present in infancy evolve into sophisticated memory systems observed in adulthood. Infants' reliance on implicit memory transitions to more explicit declarative systems as language and cognitive strategies and neural networks mature. The infant's rigid context dependent memories evolve into flexible retrieval systems capable of abstract thinking and generalization. The research has shown that infants possess robust systems for encoding and retrieving information, from recognizing their mother's voice to remembering how to control their environment. The foundation of memory in infancy mirror the systems we as adults possess. The differences, however, lie in the efficiency, the duration, and complexity of these processes as they develop alongside neural growth. By understanding these developmental trajectories, we not only learn about infants but also gain insights into the very origins of human cognition. See you in the next one.